In our middle school and high school science classes at BCA, we are currently recommending that our students use this book, Science Roots, to help both prepare and do well during biology. Definitions are well known to be one of the hardest parts about the biology curriculum, and we believe that students studying the not only Latin but also Greek roots to these definitions, to these words, these biology terms before and during biology will help them succeed and not just be memorizing definitions, which can be really difficult, but really understanding what the words mean just based on using the Latin roots. The most recommended way for students to do this is to start using this Science Roots book in the year before they start biology, whichever year that might be, whether they are taking general science that year or physical science. Because that can vary, and some students will be starting this during their general science year and some during their physical science year, we aren't going to make this any kind of requirement, and the teachers will not necessarily be presenting any information about how to do these note cards for the book. But instead, I'm making this video to help you start this with your own student and work with them on it. Once they get going, it should be a pretty self-directed process, but it can be a little bit overwhelming at first, hence why I'm making the video. So what you will need to do this curriculum is the Science Roots book. You want the second edition. There is a first edition that was made to go along with the Apologia biology, I think way back when Dr. Weil was the author of that. But now they have updated it and made it a companion book with the Berean Builders Discovering Design with Biology book, which we use at BCA. You will also want about 230 index cards, maybe some more in case you make some mistakes, maybe some more in case you decide to add some as you go. I most prefer the 4x6 cards versus the 3x5. The book actually says 3x5, but here's an example of what it looks like using the two with the same note card. You're able to create a lot more space in the 4x6 note cards versus it being a lot more compressed with the 3x5. Also, this is not even close to one of the roots that has the most example words that are used. And so especially when you get into some roots that have 4, 5, even 6 example words, you definitely don't have enough space in the 3x5 to do that well. So I recommend using 4x6 index cards. You'll also need an index card box for organizing these cards. You're going to be making 230 index cards over the course of a year or two, and you need a place to organize them well and organize them alphabetically and be able to flip through them and find them at any time. You also will need a dictionary. The curriculum recommends that you use a collegiate dictionary, in part because that will have the source languages, etc. in those. I don't know how necessary really the collegiate is for sure, but online is okay. So using the Merriam-Webster online dictionary is totally fine also. So when starting this book the year before biology, which is what we're recommending and what we're talking about in this video, you are going to complete this full list of words in 2 years. And so it approximately cuts the list in half, and half of it you're doing the first year, half of it you're doing the second year. This is a way to really decrease the workload in Berea Builders Biology while still getting the benefit of this book. So you're doing half of it in advance and not having to do as much to get the benefit during the biology year. So you will use the List 3 2-year plan on page 77 of the book to do this 2-year plan. These numbers correspond to the chapters, and specifically the hundreds place corresponds to what chapter you are in the Berea Builders Biology book that these roots are coming from, because we're looking at definitions that use these roots in those chapters. At first I kind of questioned why the 100 start with 121 is the first 100 word, and it's because they have another curriculum that is designed to go before this, but it's not necessary to use it before this, but it just FYI, it is there, called Vocabulary Vine, and those numbers are numbered up in the one teens, I think. So that's why that is. But generally, the numbers, the first number or first two numbers, if it's a 4-digit number, is the chapter from Berea Builders Biology it's coming from, and then after that they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So in this first year, the goal is to only do 2 root words per week, and you'll do that for approximately 32 weeks to get them all done in that year before biology. So it's very manageable, just doing a couple of these per week. During the biology year, they will cover this list of remaining roots, but instead of doing a simple 2 per week, they will need to do it in the chapter that they're appearing. And so generally they say in the book to do 1 per day until you're done with that chapter, until done with that chapter's list of roots. And then you move on to the next chapter and start the next chapter's roots. So you'll see in the first few chapters, it's quite heavy. There are, I don't know, probably 8 or so in each of those chapters from chapters 1 through 3. So there is quite a bit more up at the front, and then it decreases as the year goes on. So how to interpret the root list. So we are going from this list, but then we're going to go into the main list and use these pages to do the bulk of our work. So I want to make sure that you understand how to interpret these pages. Okay, so starting on the left here, we have the science roots number. So this is just the number that's been assigned in order. Other than chapter 1, it will go the chapter and then 0, 1, 0, 2, etc. Then over here, we have this key says source and reference number. That means everything in this column is either the source language for the root, or it's the reference number for the roots that are used in the example words in the order they appear. So what I mean by that is we have 121, and this root is meta, and the definition for meta is among and after. The source language for meta is Greek, and so they use GK for Greek and L for Latin. Then below that, we're going to have several example words. So we have metabolism, metamorphosis, metazoa, and it will break down those example words with the roots that are within those words. So metabolism has meta and ball. Metamorphosis has meta, morph, and osis. Metazoa has meta and zoo as roots. And in some cases, it will give us a definition of the example word. In other cases, we're going to have to look it up ourselves. So, for example, metabolism, it's referring us to the Discovering Design with Biology book. And we might not necessarily have it if we are doing this 2-year plan, but will show what to do if you don't have it yet. This one does, for metamorphosis, we have no definition at all. And so we can create a definition if we know that definition already, or we can look it up. Metazoa, it actually gives us one. Then we have sets of numbers here, and it won't always be numbers. But if it is numbers, what these numbers are referring to when they're just 3 or 4 digit numbers are the science roots that are going to be covered in depth in this book. Okay, so meta is 121 that we're already covering, and zoo is 807, which will be covered in chapter 8. But we're going to get a preview of it now. Sometimes it won't have a 3 or 4 digit number. Instead, we'll have a number that has a V and then a 2 or 3 digit number right after that. And you can ignore this little squiggle. It's a footnote symbol. But so the V76 numbers with a V are from that vocabulary vine curriculum that I previously mentioned. And these definitions of these roots are going to be listed in the glossary for this book. So you don't have to have the vocabulary vine curriculum at all to use these. They are important, and so we will be making cards based on these as well. Then finally, if there's a word instead of a number here, like know and powerful for omniscient and omnipotent, then that means that it's the definition for an incidental root. So the incidental roots are ones that are not going to be covered in detail. And there's 2 types of incidental roots. There's some that are purely incidental and are not important, but then these ones that have asterisks are important. And so we actually will be making cards for those, but we're not going to see them as much as many of the other words. And so those cards are probably going to be a little bit more sparse compared to other words that we look at, or other roots, I should say, that we look at. So let's look at what it looks like to do your first card. It's your first day doing this curriculum. And so we're doing the 2-year curriculum. So you're looking at the first year, and the first word on our list, we're just going in order, is omni. Okay. These numbers are really just for reference. We're not going to put them on the cards at all. We're just going to be able to use them to flip through the book. Okay. So omni. So you're going to take your first card and write omni at the top. Then we're going to go to where it is in the main list. So chapter 1, and then 22 was that reference number. And so 122, omni, and the definition for omni is all. So we're going to write all up with the word, with the root at the top. Then we're going to write what the source language is. So L for Latin, and put that at the top right. Next, you're going to write the first example word on the card. So we just go straight down, and omnivore is our first example word. And we're going to separate it out based on its roots, but still spelling it correctly and just writing the roots in there. And we're going to underline the parts of that word that are, in fact, the roots. So here we have omnivore. And we've separated this with a little space and are underlining 2 roots, omni and vor. The next thing you're going to do is start a card also for the other roots that were in that example word. So we had omni, which is the card that we were working on, but we also saw vor there. So we're going to create a card for vor. And to find vor, we see here that it's one of the vocabulary vine words. If it wasn't a vocabulary vine word, and it also wasn't didn't have an asterisk, we wouldn't create a card for it. But because it is a vocabulary vine word, it is important, and so we're going to create a card. To find the definition for this root, we're going to go to the root glossary, which can be found pages 57 to 66. And everything is in alphabetical order in that glossary. So find the V, vor, and the definition for vor is eat, comma, devour, and it has a Latin source language. So we're just going to create the exact same thing with the root, its definition, and L for the Latin source language. Then we're going to go ahead and write that example word exactly the same as we wrote it on the Omni card. So now let's go back to the Omni card, and we need to find the definition of this example word. And let me go back real quick and show you something. Okay, so for omnivore, which is the definition that we're going to be looking for, it says CDDB, which is Discovering Design with Biology. So it's referring to the biology book, chapter 1. Well, because we're doing this the year before biology, we might not have that biology book yet. And that's okay. We're just going to look up the definition the normal way, okay? So if you have a dictionary, you may use that. What I do not want you to use is Google. Do not just put this into Google. It's going to give you a definition through AI, and that definition might be really wordy and not necessarily the most concise, the best definition. So don't do this, okay? Instead, if you're going to use a dictionary online, go to the actual dictionary online, go to Merriam-Webster or whatever other dictionary that you choose to use, and type in the search term in the search box within that dictionary website. Then, so for this one, omnivore comes up, and it tells us that the definition of omnivore is one that is omnivorous. That is a useless definition for our purposes because it basically has the word that we're trying to define in the definition. So we don't want to use that definition at all. So there's two options that we can do. Webster's has a option here where you can click this and look at a simple definition. So we can look at that and see what that looks like, if that serves our purposes better. We could also click on omnivorous, and omnivorous is the adjective form of this, and so it might do a better job of explaining what they mean by that. So let's look at both of those. The simple definition says an animal that eats both plants and other animals, and then it says sometimes used to refer to people. We probably don't need this part. Then if I look at that adjective, omnivorous, there's two definitions, feeding on both animal and vegetable substances, and the second one is avidly taking in everything as if devouring or consuming. I like this one because it uses the word everything, which is quite similar to what our definition of our root is all. However, we're talking about science terms here, and specifically biology terms. And so this one is really the better biology term, biology definition, and the one that we should probably use. The other thing that we need to take into account is our second root. We want to make a definition on these cards that applies to both of the roots, that shows how both of the roots come into play with this definition, because our goal here is to learn both of these roots. So we want something that's all and eat and devour, okay? And I have, instead of animal, I have one. And it doesn't matter. Part of this is making this work for you, however you are best going to learn these roots, okay? So there isn't a hard and fast rule that you have to find this definition and write it exactly, like make it work. So I've created this definition from everything that I've looked at here. One who eats both plants and animals. And in parentheses here, I put the word all. All doesn't mean exactly both, but it's kind of close. So I'm putting this all next to the both. And I want to underline the words within this definition that match the definitions of each of the roots, right? So we have eat goes with vor, and this all, which is kind of similar to both, goes with omni. And that's going to help me remember what an omnivore is. The last thing you're going to do for this example word is write the same definition for the example word on the second root card. Okay, so on that secondary root, which was vor, you're going to write one who eats both, in parentheses, all plants and animals. Exactly the same way. Now we can move on to the next example word in the list. So let's look at the list. We just did omnivore, and now we can look at omniscient. And omniscient is composed of two roots, omni and cyan or shin. So we're going to write omniscient, and this one is really nice, and it gives us the definition right in this text. So we don't have to look it up. We can write all knowing. We know that omni is all, and we are given know right here. So shin, or the cyan, means no. So what do you think science means, right? We also need to create a card for that other root. Because it has this asterisk, it's an incidental root, but it's considered an important one. So we're going to create a card for it as well. So we're going to look this up in the root glossary. We did already see that it said no, that the definition was no based on the previous page, but we could not see the source language in that. So now we can write cyan, no, and Latin for the source language. Then we're going to write the example word in there and its definition. Let's move on to the next example word. So our next example word is omnipotent. So we can write the word, and again, we're given the definition, so we can go ahead and write the definition. We're also given the definition of the second root, which is powerful, so we're underlining powerful here. And just like before, we're going to create another card for that secondary root because it's considered important with the asterisks. So we're going to write potent, meaning powerful, and then Latin is our source language. Then we can write that example word and the definition just as we did on the previous card. So just a note about the incidental roots. These incidental roots are any roots that don't have a number, such as 121 or V11. They're going to instead have that definition listed with the example word. So if they have a word listed with the example word, that's one of those incidental roots. If they have an asterisk, then they are important, and you do want to make a note card for them because they are going to be important for biology. The ones that are more unimportant will have no extra markings. They're probably unimportant because we're going to see them one time, and so it's not super important to memorize what that meaning is for just one word. So therefore, you do not need to make a new card for the unimportant ones unless you really want to. So for Omni, you're done. You can now file those cards in your notebook or note card box in alphabetical order. And so that's done with the first day. Now let's go to the next day that you're doing that this week and do the next card. Okay, so the next word or the next root on our list is herb, number 123. The first thing that you're going to want to do once you get going, before you start making any new cards, whether it's from a one of your main list root words or it's from one of your secondary root words, is check to make sure that you haven't already started the card, because we're going to see a lot of spiral going on here where there are cards that we've already started that we're just going to add to as we go through the curriculum. Okay, so herb or herb means grass or non-woody plants. We just looked that up in the main root word list. 123, herb, grass, non-woody plant, and it's Latin. Next, we're going to write that first example word on the card, which is herbivore. And we are taking it here. So the two roots are herb or herb and vor. That I is missing. And so when I do this here, I'm just underlining it and then not underlining that I. Okay, and separating it into two parts. So we're going to look to see if there's already a card for additional roots in the example word. If not, we're going to create a new one. In this case, there is one before. We already did omnivore. And so we're going to pull out that vor card from our stack in our note card box and start adding to it with herbivore. So we're just going to add the example word to this card, herbivore. And then going back to the herb card, we're going to look up the definition of this first example word. You can see here it says, see the biology book, which we don't have again. So we're going to go ahead and turn to our dictionary. So unsurprisingly, the dictionary does the same thing for this one. It says an herbivorous animal. So let's look at the simple definition. It says an animal that eats only plants. And looking at the adjective again, says feeding on plants. Just like before, we want to make sure that we are comparing with our secondary root to make sure that if we can, we're not always going to be able to do this well, but if we can, we're going to include definitions from both roots in our definition for this example word. And so my definition here for herbivore is one who only eats plants. And so I'm pulling eats from vor and plants from herb, and that helps me remember what herbivore means. Again, we're going to take that secondary root and now add the same definition on that, so it's on both of those. So now start on the next example word, herbarium. So we will write herbarium on our herb card, and it gave us the definition, which is so nice when it does that. And so I'm going to go ahead and write the definition: a plant collection or where it is kept. Once again, we're going to start a card also for the other roots in the example word. So arium here. And when I look this up, the number here can help you make sure that you are getting the right one, because a lot of times we'll have some that look really close, very similar near each other. And so it's just a double check. So 1003 is arium. Also, Ari and Tori are part of this root. And so we're going to write all of those, okay? And the definition for those is a place for. I shortened this to just place for. And the source language is Latin. So now we have the definition. We need to evaluate these root definitions to so that we can underline the keywords in our example definition. So let's look at these side by side. Um, we have the herbarium in both of these, right? And for herb, we have grass or non-woody plant. And for the arium, we have place for. Okay, so the plant part is easy. I'm going to underline plant and plant. And there really isn't a great place for place for. You could, if it, and this is completely up to you, you could underline the whole where it is kept. That's another way to say place for, okay? Or you could change that definition to say or place for them, okay? Um, but if you can't really find a great match, what you'll do instead is finish the definition and just write right after the definition of the root that doesn't really fit in your example word definition. So here I just wrote place for after it and underlined it. All right, now the next example word is herbicide. So we'll write that on our herb card. And again, we're given the definition, so we can just go ahead and write that there. A substance which kills plants. Next step is, you guessed it, make a card for the other root. So here we have side or sid. And when I look that up, it says sid, side, or cis. So I'm going to write all of those at the top of my card. They have two definitions that are actually different. Okay, so it's pointing that out that these are actually two roots that have the same spelling, and so cut or kill. And then the source language is Latin. So we just write all of that on the card and then write the example word and the definition from the herb card. Again, we're now going to compare them, put them side by side, and see how we can underline them to show the definitions of both of the roots. All right, so herba, we have plants, we can underline that, and side is kill, and we have kill in our definition. So it perfectly fits. We just underline kills plants, and that's what an herbicide does. The last thing we're going to do here on this one is add extra words. Extra words are not going to be like our example words. We don't have to include a definition. You can if you want, and you might want to later, because some of these extra words are going to be example words that are important for future roots. So if you have space for these, leave a room for potentially adding a definition later. You might want to later, depending on the word, or you can add it now if you want. It's nice that on a lot of these, the definition is already included too. So for herbaceous, I'm doing this one in a different color. So that's a way for me to, instead of, I don't have to write example words, but I can still denote that they are the example words by writing it in a different color. One thing I forgot to mention that could also be helpful is when we're doing this underlining these words in different colors. So let's say I do herbe in green and vor in red. Well, here I would do plants in green and eats in red. And that would help me kind of denote which root the that part of the definition is coming from. But here you'll see that for all my extra words, I'm just putting them in blue to kind of set them apart a little bit from the other example words. The purpose of the extra words is just to help your brain with putting together what that root means. All right. Just giving your brain, giving yourself extra words with, hopefully you could even just give a definition for some of these extra words just by already knowing that herb is root. Okay. On this one, you can see it says suffix. And so this means that acious is just a generic suffix that is just being used to add something. It basically herbaceous, acious makes herb an adjective, right? And so it's a characteristic instead of a noun. If the secondary roots in the extra words are important roots, then you'll want to start a new card. So in that case, that wasn't an important root. We had acious, which is just a generic suffix. And so we're not going to start a card for acious. But if it was an important root, we would start a new card, but you don't need to write any example words. You're just going to do the bare minimum of starting that card with the title and the source language at the top. So for example, when we get to hypoglycemia is an extra word for the root hypo, and they have that word has secondary roots of glyce and hemo. And so what you would do for that is you would create a card each for glyce and hemo, but you would only put those root definitions and the source at the top of those cards. So you just do that top line, that title line for those cards. So here's another example. And this is just a finished card, right? So this was hypo, and we would have all of these example words here. So like this one, for example, there was no way to really put underline any part of this definition that really fits with the roots. And sometimes you're going to find that you're like, how exactly does that fit with the roots? And you have to kind of stretch to do it. But when it doesn't fit well in the definition, you just write the root definitions after it and underline those and leave it at that. So we have hypodermic, which hypo is beneath or below, beneath. Dermic, derm is skin. And for each of these, we would be creating secondary root cards for the and derm and therm. I think maybe we don't do it on therm. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do, because it's a vocabulary bind. And underline. So hypo below, therm is temperature when we look it up in the glossary. And then for this one, we would have 3 extra words: hypoglycemia, hypoplasia, and hypotonic. And I'm able to leave some space and put them on different lines in case I do want to add a definition later. And so I do that. There's some cases where, though, you might not have enough space. Some of these roots may have so many terms, like hydro has 6 terms that are just example words, for example, that you may have to eliminate the spacing on the card, so you may not be able to put these nice spaces between the words, and it just end up kind of cramped. You may not be able to put each of these on its own line. You might have to group them together. Or potentially you split them into 2 cards. And so you could have, this part 1, and then another card. You'd have the same information up top, and you just say part 1 and part 2, and just have different example words on the second one. Okay. So those are some ideas of what you could do. I would prefer to make a second card so I can keep this looking nice. I like having spaces between things and it not looking really cluttered. But this is one of those things that is entirely up to you and how you learn best. Plasm, this one's crazy. How many extra words it has. So every time you finish a set, you're just going to add it to your card box in alphabetical order, okay? So here we added arium, we added side, we added herb, we added, I guess, a hypo because I just did that one, but that didn't go with herb and omni, but and that's what you do, and you just put them back in your box and be ready for the next time. So then when you get to your biology year, it's going to change a little bit, right? Instead of doing 2 a week, you're now going to be using this second year list, and you're going to take the remaining roots for each chapter and split them up. Well, there's 2 ways you could do it. You could split them up between the 2 weeks spent on the chapter. So you could do 4 one week, 4 another one, or some of these only have a couple, right? So you could do one week, one the second week that you're doing chapter 16, because you're taking 2 weeks for every chapter. Or you could just do one a day until all the roots for that chapter are done, and then you're done with the roots for that chapter. The other thing that you will want to do when you are doing this during the biology year is spend time reviewing all the roots for the chapter. So all the roots for the chapters, including the ones that you already did the previous year, plus the review words and roots at the beginning of the chapter list. Okay, so after starting in chapter 3, they include review words at the top before you get to any of the roots here. Okay, and so these are words that you've already done from the previous chapters, and you're just spending a little bit of time reviewing those as part of your studies. The last thing I want to just point out, there is an appendix in this book. It's Appendix A on page 67, and it's a taxonomy chart. And it lists all the taxonomy with kingdoms through the phyla, and some of them go down to suborder with some roots and definitions, right? So, Archaeobacteria has the roots archaeo and bacteria, and then you can look up the roots. Some of them have definitions, right? Mendocicutes means different cell wall. Okay. I will say though that this particular list is a little bit out of date. For example, Monera is not used anymore. This was an old classification that has since been separated into 2 different groups. So, and like many of the Protista are categorized differently. So just make sure you're referring to your biology book or your teacher for the most accurate information as far as what the names of some of these are. And don't just fully trust this, because this is one thing that I apparently did not get updated from the earlier version way back when it was used with the very old Apologia book. So that should hopefully get you through the first week or so and get you rolling so you can do this the rest of your first year of a 2-year plan of doing this Science Roots book to prepare for biology.